I've talked to a number of my friends that have retired in the last 4 or 5 years. And the thing that they all say is they have yet to find something that fills the competitive void.
I actually draw a comparison between what you described to being on the trail.
Yeah.
That's probably the closest I'll ever get to an NBA game. And then, and then though I have been courtside, so, there's that. But certainly I can see people who in politics also chase that high again. Right, very happy to welcome to Yang Speaks or appear on his podcast, depending upon where you're listening this. The 15th most prolific three-point shooter in NBA history, Mr. JJ Redick. JJ, welcome.
Andrew, thanks for having me on. I'm actually tied for 14th with LeBron.
Yeah, you're going to beat LeBron
prolific,
in a minute as soon as games resume. That's true. You're tied for 14th. I didn't mean to sell you short,
No,
JJ.
I'm just kidding. I'm only kidding. No, I'm excited to hopefully play some basketball. I don't think anyone expected us to be potentially playing games under these circumstances. So it should be a little weird.
Well, for you, I feel like for you it'd be a bit of a homecoming because you started your career in Orlando, so it's going to be like going back to familiar haunts. Though I guess it's not in the arena; it's over across the way, in Disney World. You were saying that this reminds you of AAU, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, so starting in 8th grade and then 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, each summer after those grades, you would go down to Orlando for like 2-3 weeks and you'd stay at a hotel in like Kissimmee and you'd shuttle back and forth between Disney Wide World of Sports and you'd play, 2 or 3 games a day for weeks at a time. The difference now is that we can't leave the property, so we're like quarantined in one place for potentially 3 months. But it'll be very similar. The interesting thing is the league is now saying that if you're not playing in a game, you can go watch other teams play in person because there's going to be no fans in the crowd. So we're all sort of in the same bubble. So I'm actually interested to see how no fans plays out and how other guys going to games play out. And if they start heckling, friends on their team or maybe guys they don't like on the other team, because there's not going to be any other noise, fan noise to filter things out.
They can hear you. It's true. You shout some shit out. They'll hear you loud and clear.
Yeah.
So what proportion of NBA players do you think played in those AAU games? Probably most of the domestic. Is that right?
I would assume so. I think a lot of guys in my generation certainly played in that AAU tournament down in Orlando.
So it's going to feel familiar to just about everyone in a different way, at least that came of age in the same way. Now, for you, you're a family man at this point. You've got young kids. And does the family go with you? Is that the plan, or how does that work?
Well, the NBA has said, and the NBPA, our union, agreed to allow families to come into the bubble once the first round of the playoffs are done. So most teams will arrive sometime between July 7th and 9th, and the first round of the playoffs will be done probably around the end of August. So you're looking at around 2 months if you make it that far with no family. But for most players that don't live in the same place that they play, like myself, I live in Brooklyn, I'm playing in New Orleans. I've got a quarantine down in New Orleans, so my family's not coming with me. So I actually will be without my family for at least 2 months because I'm headed down to New Orleans momentarily. Yeah.
Oh, that's really difficult, man. I mean, how old are your kids?
They're going to be 6 and 4 in August. So if we make the playoffs, I won't be there for their birthdays.
Yeah, and I mean, having 2 young kids myself, 2 months consecutively away from them is a long time. Like, yeah. I was traveling on the road for the campaign, but even in my case, most like 1 to 2 week periods, I'd be able to sneak back home for like a day or two. Like if you go 10 days in a row not seeing your family, that's actually a long time when you got young kids. So for you, 2 months, that must be much longer than you'd be used to. Is that right?
For sure. And it's interesting you bring up the point about trying to sneak back home for a day, because there's periods of time during the season or during our marriage where, Chelsea maybe was in New York for an extended period of time. I was still playing in LA, and we would have these 2 to 3 day gaps. And I would actually fly LA to New York to go back home. Or in the case of New Orleans, like she went up for Christmas break and stayed through Christmas with the kids. I was on a West Coast trip. I happened to be up here like 2 days after they came up here playing Philly. So I drove up after the game and then flew back to New Orleans the next day just to see the kids for literally an hour that time.
Literally an hour, dude.
Literally an hour.
I did the same shit.
Yeah.
Where it would be like I would take the red eye back from California, like, be like fundraising or campaigning out there, and then take the red eye, show up, surprise the kids for like a couple of hours, and then like, hop on a plane to Iowa or whatever.
What's the longest you've gone? Do you know like the longest you've gone without seeing your kids?
During the heyday of the campaign, it stretched on to maybe, let's call it 2 weeks, like between 2 and 3 weeks, where I would just not have any exposure to my family. And that was really hard. Down the stretch, the family actually came to me when we had a campaign bus and the rest of it. And then I got dad cool points. Like, it was the first time my kids actually thought like my running for president was cool. It was like, there's a bus with dad's head on it. But so, yeah, I was like you, where I would like spend 8 hours traveling to get like 2 or 3 hours with the family and then hit the road again. But 15 days, I think, around that level.
This will absolutely be the longest period of time that I will have gone without seeing the kids. Obviously, for my wife, I went the first 22 years of my life without seeing her, so I should be fine in that regard.
Well, one of the things that happened to me, JJ, is like so, and this is something. This will just be general relationship or marriage advice or whatever. Yeah. But one thing that goes wrong is when you and your partner are focused on different things, and then you talk to each other, and like there's like a bit of a barrier between you. And at least in my family's case, it's like my wife's like laser focused on the kids, and then I'd be laser focused on, let's call it, work or the campaign. And then it's like harder to communicate with your partner. And I think like, at least for me, Evelyn naturally just focused on the kids. So like the more you could share, then the more you guys like sync up and click. So the fact that you're not going to see your kids for X period of time, I mean, like it sounds like Chelsea would be like, I'm not going to miss JJ, but Chelsea starts to like, it starts to eat at her that the kids don't see you. At least that's the way it happens in my house.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like the dynamics of, a lot of relationships are that way, where there's one person who has to sacrifice a little bit and be laser focused on the house. And truthfully, in a way, like I have the luxury of being laser focused on sort of the big picture of things. And Chelsea said that to me the other day. You always think about the big things, the big things, the big things. I need help on the details, i.e., making sure the kids change out of their pajamas in the morning, and can you do the dishes, and doing all those sorts of things, which I naturally do. But look, we can all sort of help out our partner a little bit more. So that's been one of the interesting things just about this whole experience in COVID is, I mean, I've never lived
you
this
haven't
consecutively.
Been this home consecutively
ever.
like your entire adult life.
No. So it's been interesting. It's been an experience for sure.
Well, I'll say for me, I've gotten to know my kids better because I was on the trail for the last 2 years. You'd have like a day here, a day there, and then spending weeks consecutively with them. Like, I actually just literally know my children better than I did at any point in the past. And also my kids, your kids are about the same age. They're actually like developing more personality and awareness where you can interact with them in different ways than was the case when they were younger. So I'm sure you had the same experience. I mean, it's one of the things you don't like to, go into it, but like, at least for me, that was sort of a blessing, honestly, of this time.
Oh, no doubt. And my youngest, who will be 4, like I said, in August, is really starting to develop his personality where, when we moved to New Orleans, and my family came with me to New Orleans. So when we moved in October, he was a certain way. and now he's just a completely different kid. And
Like, turn into another kid.
Yeah, it's and he's like thin. We used to call him Squishy because he was a little bit chubby. So actually, Knox, my oldest, named him Squishy when he was a baby because he was a very chubby baby. But he's now like thinned out and he's got muscles and he's so talkative. It's fun for any parent. You know, it's really fun to see your kids obviously grow physically, but seeing their personalities develop is one of like the most rewarding things in life for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. I remember when you signed with New Orleans, I remember scratching my chin for a minute being like, because, you had this awesome career. I think you might have like the longest streak of consecutive playoffs made or something like that in the NBA right now. What is it, like 12 years in a row, 13 years?
Longest active playoff streak. Yeah, 13 years in a row.
Yeah, and you're clearly in demand. Like your core skill is now the most important skill in the NBA, arguably. You played on these contending teams and showed that you can help anyone win at the highest levels. And so I remember when you signed with New Orleans, like I personally as a fan was like, like scratching my chin being like, like that's sort of an interesting choice for JJ. Can you, and you probably talked about this in another context, but like was a lot of that, driven by at that point, had they already gotten the number one pick and you knew it was going to be Zion because I figure there's a Duke connection, or was there something else that drove you to New Orleans?
Sure. I had finished my second year in Philly. We lost to the Toronto Raptors in a heartbreaking fashion. Kawhi Leonard hits a buzzer beater in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference semifinals to beat us. There's that sort of licking the wound period that every athlete goes through when your season ends without a championship. So there's 2 weeks that go by. And, then all of a sudden it was like, well, we're a month away from free agency. And so you start having conversations with your agent and, people around the league to try to get a sense of what the landscape is going to be. The issue for me was I did want to go back to Philly. We had sort of established a life in Brooklyn. I was commuting to and from Philly every day. It was not an easy commute, but I was doing it. My family was really settled here in Brooklyn. My sister, or my wife's twin sister, lives 3 blocks from us here in Brooklyn. So we just felt like this was really our home. The opportunity with New Orleans, I looked at it in a number of ways. First of all, financially, it was the most lucrative contract that was offered to me last summer. But Trajan Langdon had just been hired as the GM. David Griffin had just been hired as the president of basketball ops, or vice president, I should say. His official title is vice president. All intents and purposes, he's the president. They get the number 1 pick about 3 or 4 days before free agency. They draft Zion. They draft Jackson Hayes with the 8th pick. They draft Nickeil Alexander-Walker with the 17th pick. They make the trade. They trade Anthony Davis. They bring in Lonzo Ball. They bring in Brandon Ingram. And there was a number of days where like you're waiting, like, I wonder if Philly is going to work out. I wonder if Philly is going to work out. And I just felt like if all this great stuff is happening in New Orleans, like I can move my family for a year or two, and this will be a great opportunity as well. It also offered me another chance to mentor younger players and to sort of be the voice of reason in the locker room and to help guys obviously grow as players, but grow as men in this league, and that's been something that I got to do in Philly and that I've continued in New Orleans, and that's been hugely rewarding for me.
That's awesome. I'm sure that's one reason why Trajan and David wanted you so badly, because they knew they'd have a bunch of youngsters, and then they were going to bring you in as like the ultra disciplined vet to help steer them straight.
Yeah.
So I have a question as a fan that I'd love your perspective on. So you come into the league 13 years ago. You have this really storied college career, but it's not like you're a slam dunk sure thing. You don't get like tons of playing time early in your career. It's a different league then too, where it wasn't as shooting focused. And so my big question is, you've now played with like hundreds of different dudes across the league, across their career. My big question is like, how much of NBA player success is predicated on just like getting a little bit lucky in terms of having like a coaching staff that believes in you, or like the right development around you. Like, how many guys come into the league where clearly they actually had the right talent level or makeup to succeed, but it didn't work out for whatever reason? Like, how much of it's just freaking dumb luck, arbitrary, and how much of it is, because to me, there are all of these guys where you would think to yourself, like, that person should have succeeded somewhere, but they ended up in like a bad situation once, twice, and then that's it. Because, the NBA is not exactly like, let's give this person another chance kind of environment. It's like everyone's just trying to win. So how much of the success is based upon you're getting like the right opportunities? And are there a few guys that you played with where you were like, that person actually should still be in the NBA, but is not because they just had a little bit of like bad luck or bad organization fit?
Sure. It's a great question, first of all. And I think you could apply this to a lot of different industries, a lot of different professions.
Yes.
So there's 5 to 10% of NBA players where luck, situation, teammates, system, it doesn't really matter. They're just that much better than everyone else. Whether it's physical or skill, they're just that much better. And those guys, I believe, could thrive on any team, in any system, with any coach. Then there's a separate group of guys who, call it like 80% of 70% of the league that, they're good enough, they care enough about the game, and they're smart enough that they can figure out and adapt coach to coach, team to team, season to season. And then the rest of the league is that 15 to 20% of guys who my math might have been off there, but
you're pretty much right.
The last group there, where they're fringe guys, or it is relevant to their situation and who the coach is and who's around them, and what their role is. I would always say this: in any of those, whether it's the 5 to 10, well, maybe not the 5 to 10%, but let's say the other 90% of the league. Here's what matters most. They have to care enough about basketball and love basketball enough to work through a lot of ups and downs, to work through the grind, to work through self-doubt and all the mental hurdles that this game provides us. They have to be smart enough to figure all that stuff out on the fly in real time with immediate feedback. And they also have to be sort of, this is another part of it, they have to be smart enough to operate, emotionally intelligent enough to operate inside a locker room. If you're one of the 5 or 10% of the best guys, you can kind of afford to be an asshole. If you're in that next tier, it's hit or miss. If you're in that last tier, you can't be an asshole.
You got to be like everyone's favorite dude.
Yeah, you're out of the league because your talent is not worth, the headache that you're bringing into a locker room. And look, the guys who have figured that dynamic out maybe aren't as skilled or as talented as some of the other guys I've played with, but they've had 10, 11, 12, 13-year careers because they figured that out. To answer the last part of your question, there's a guy that I came up with. We were in the same high school class. We were on the same McDonald's All-American team. We played in the ACC together. He left after his junior year. I entered the draft after my senior year. His name's Rashad McCants. He went to UNC.
Yeah, McCants. He was like supposed to be.
Yeah, he was an unbelievable player. I'm sure he probably can still hoop a little bit, but I thought, when we were sort of at that age where we were transitioning into the NBA, I thought he was going to be an unbelievable player in the NBA. I don't know the reasons why he didn't have a long career, but he's one of those guys that I always think of that, was talented enough to have a long and illustrious NBA career, and for whatever reason, it just didn't work out. And there's cases across the board, but just because I was friends with Rashad, that he's the first guy I thought of.
Yeah, Rashad, I think he had said something to the effect that, like when you get some kind of negative reputation, whether it's deserved or not, it just kind of sort of sticks with you and everyone just buys into it. I think I saw an interview with Rashad about that. I was curious about this in part because as a fan, you look up and you see that there are guys who just seem to me, it's like, well, it's strange that person's not in the league. And of course, you don't know the players, you don't know the personalities the way that you do. But then you feel like there are some folks that, just had a couple of bad breaks. Now, the fact that
I want to interrupt you real quick, Andrew.
Oh yeah, please.
Because you brought up a great point. And I said this to our team early in the season when we were in the middle of our 13-game losing streak. And I brought up the point about what people say about you, what people write about you, your reputation, and how that sticks. And all of us, whether we're a public figure, an athlete, we're working at Google, we're in a law firm, whatever it may be, the people above you, they're writing a book about you. And everything gets put in that book, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. And when it comes time to then make decisions about your pay, about your future, about your role, what do you refer to? You refer to the book. Now, the book is a metaphor. Obviously, it's not a physical book.
Yeah, though sometimes it could be a literal file.
Yeah, that's true. That's not all of us, but so everybody is constantly having this book being written about them. And you have to be wary of every action that you do. So your body language matters, how you interact with your teammates, how you interact with your coaches, what you say in the media. Are you on time to things? Those things all go in the book, and they all add up over 6 months or 6 years or 16 years. It all adds up. And one more thing, from a fan's perspective, I love hearing this stuff. So there's 450 players roughly in the NBA, and there's a lot of fans out there who say such and such player sucks. A lot of fans would probably say that about me. JJ Redick sucks, right? In reality, all 450 of us could bust anyone's ass. We would just, you don't want to see us in a one-on-one game. I guarantee you that. So there's a sort of relative scale of talent and ability in the NBA, but relative to the broader world, we are the 450 best players in the league, with the exception of guys like Rashad, of course, and you could probably think of a few off the top of your head as well.
Yeah, a couple of the names just popped into my head, and you could shoot these down because they could be totally wrong. But Anthony Randolph, I was like, why is that guy not in the league? And
yeah, it's a good one. That's a good one.
And then of recent vintage, Jimmer Fredette, like that. I feel like that dude tore it up in college. He tears it up overseas, and then anytime he gets a cup of coffee in the NBA, he's like gone, like 10 days later. So just random names that popped in my head from different time periods. But yeah, man, you guys are like the best players in the world. Any of you could bust any like normal person's,
I think there has to be an ability though to sort of accept not being the man. And I'm not saying that about Rashad or Jimmer or Anthony Randolph, because I've never played with any of those guys in the NBA. But I've played with enough guys to know that they would probably rather go play overseas and have the offense run through them and get the majority of the shots than be the 8th or 9th guy on an NBA bench. It's not that they can't play in the NBA or won't, or not able to play in the NBA or wouldn't get a job offer. I think a lot of it comes down to just their happiness on a day-to-day basis in playing basketball. Because, again, from a fan's perspective, you would probably say, well, what does this guy have to complain about? He's in the NBA. But if your day-to-day enjoyment of your job, no matter what your paycheck is, I don't care who you are, your day-to-day enjoyment of your job is not what you feel like it should be, then you're going to consider other options. I think it was Freud talked about, right? The key to happiness is the balance of love, work, and play. Well, unfortunately for us, we get to play basketball, but it's work. And that's the work portion of our life. It's not like going to the pickup, at the YMCA. That's play. This is real work. And when it doesn't sort of fulfill you in a meaningful way, then maybe guys go overseas and find more meaning there.
People underestimate that all the time, JJ, where they look up and say like, well, you're getting paid X, like suck it up, you should be happy, etc. And this translates to politics 100%, where I would see what other candidates were doing. And like people don't know how miserable a lot of it can be. And so you're like, oh, what are you complaining about? You're, running for Congress, or in my case, running for president, or in your case, it's like, you're you're a professional athlete. But if it sucks, it sucks. Like, you're still a human being, Like
Right.
if you, like in the example you're using, it's like if you're used to being a star with a ball in your hand, and then you're like, the 12th man on the bench and you never get up, like, you could just be like, that sucked. It's not like, it doesn't really matter what's like, I love to play basketball. I'm not playing. Like, I'm low man on the totem pole in the practices. The coaches don't value me. Like, that can suck regardless of what your stature is. In my case, it was like you drive for hours in a rental car away from your family in the winter in Iowa to the Union Hall, and there are like 8 people there, and you're like, this sucks. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, and so people, like, you're all still human beings. Like, all like the human motivations still apply. It's one of the reasons why I think people love sports so much, because like the lessons and principles apply everywhere. And a lot of the organizational success you're talking about, like, do people in business have that book? Of course. Like, anytime you start interacting with the org, like any impression you make, it's getting logged somewhere. And then, you're either given the job or not. You're either given responsibility or not. I mean, it's interesting. You don't know this about me, but I was like, I was brought in by the NBA Players Association to be like an entrepreneurship mentor for some of those post players. And there were both current players and former players who were in this program. And I was just someone who came in for the day. But I've met a bunch of former players, and I have to say that, like, I saw how difficult the adjustment was for many of them. Like, that adjustment, and that's also the human thing. It's like, you think to yourself, well, like, you're one of the best basketball players in the world. You have millions of dollars. Like, there must be no problems. And then you get there, and then there are these people who were like, hey, I'm like retired at the age of 37. I don't know what the fuck to do now. And, I have money, but I don't have as much money as everyone seems to think I have. Like, everyone thinks I have money coming out of my ears.
Yeah.
And then people are all coming to me with these opportunities that require money. And like, who do I trust? What decisions do I make? Like, so like, like the human condition applies to everyone. Like, it's like certainly NBA players. So I can see why players would make decisions that a fan might be like, why are they doing that? But like, just comes down to whether you enjoy it.
For sure. I've talked to a number of my friends that have retired in the last 4 or 5 years. And the thing that they all say is they have yet to find something that fills the competitive void, that fills the void, the feeling that you get when you're in a playoff game on the road, you win a big game, you come back to the locker room, those first few minutes back in the locker room, the euphoria you feel, the sense of accomplishment you feel, your nerves, your senses are heightened. It's like we've been programmed now for decades to seek that. As athletes, we're programmed. That's our brain chemistry operates on finding that feeling. And we stop playing, and it's really hard to replicate that for anyone, but it's really hard to replicate that if you're 37 or 38 years old and you're got to start something new, and you're starting a lot of times, sort of at the bottom.
Yeah. It's something I saw multiple times. And one other thing that a former player said to me, he said, like, one of the tough parts is that as a professional athlete, you're always like the model of competence and fortitude and strength. And so when people come to you with these opportunities, you can't say, like, I don't understand what the hell you're talking about. You can't, like, it actually is like a tough thing for an athlete to say, like, look, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to understanding like this business opportunity, like this thing. And so like there's a lot of feigned knowledge or like where you're not able to be honest this is what a former athlete told me, and I heard this and I was like, that makes a lot of sense, because you're like at the pinnacle in one thing, and it's very hard to go from that to all of a sudden saying like, I don't know fuck all about what you're talking about.
Right. No, that requires a little bit of humility, I think. The other component is we are relevant. We're relevant as athletes. It's much easier, and I've heard so many guys say this. I mean, we get retired players through the union come speak to our teams every year. So I've heard this now for 14 years from multiple players. If I want to get on the phone and get in contact with someone, let's say a CEO of a Wall Street bank, a CEO of a food startup, those things are relatively easy for me. It might take one phone call, it might take two, it might take one email, but generally speaking, I can get in contact with that person. I'm not just saying I'm saying the active player. As a former player, when you're former NBA player as opposed to NBA player, it's much harder. And for a lot of guys, especially in the previous generation, they waited until they were done playing to start pursuing other opportunities. And what you've seen now in our generation of players, and even amplified even more so with the current guys that are coming up, the 18 to 22 crowd, is they all have something else going on. They all have their hands in something else. They're all pursuing other things and still finding that balance of working and loving the game.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm glad people are getting an earlier start. I actually draw a comparison between what you described about the nerves and the energy of the playoff game to being on the trail. And I said just now, like, that's like, the fact is, like, when I was campaigning, when I was in the dead of winter showing up to Iowa when there were 8 people in the Union Hall or whatever, it was actually still cool and awesome. Like, because the 8 people, I was like, and I used to tell this joke. I was like, do you know how many Californians each of you is worth? Then I'd be like, 1,000 each. So there's like, there are 8,000 people in this room. So I'm all good. And I was good because there was nothing like fighting for, the future of the country. And like, if there was one person I thought could help me, like, I didn't care how many people showed up. So that's probably the closest I'll ever get to an NBA game. And then, though I have been courtside, so there's that. But then the campaign ends, and like we're still doing other things, and I'm like excited about them. But certainly, I can see people who in politics also chase that high again. Like there's some people, and I don't consider myself one of them happily, but there's some people who just really get somewhat addicted to the spotlight, or like addicted to being, as you say, maybe like highly, highly relevant. Like I'm not really wired that way. I'm like not very accustomed to seeking press the way that I did on the trail. But I think those are parallels, man. And like, it's interesting. I can almost conceptualize like this, like an XY bar graph where like, if you're a current player, your relevance is like super high. And then when you retire, like it starts to drop like with like each preceding year.
Yeah. Oh man, it's spot on. I was actually going to bring this up. You kind of just talked about it, but I was going to bring you this up earlier. I can't remember what you had said earlier, but in terms of your motivation, and you and I have spoken a few times on the phone prior to this. So again, coming from a casual sort of, friendship, but also my observance of you as a public figure, I've always felt like your motivation for running for president and for doing the things that you're doing now are in the right place, where a lot of politicians, their motivation can be very self-serving at times. This is not a liberal take or a conservative take. This is across the board, right? We need more people in public office who have the desire to serve and help the greater good, to serve and help our country, as opposed to serving themselves. Perhaps no greater example of this than the person in the Oval Office right now, of course, in President Trump, who has proven time and time again that he is simply acting in his own self-interest. And we as a country need to get away from that effective immediately, but certainly in November.
I think, unfortunately, politics attract certain type of people. Some of them are awesome, but like some of them just really just love to see themselves on TV, love to see pictures of themselves or posters like smeared up on things. I almost feel like we should take people who would never run for office and put them in charge. like that would be like what you would never dream of. Actually, like running around and saying, look at me. Like, we should probably give you a lot of responsibility. Because the behaviors necessary to run for office successfully overlap only slightly with the behaviors you would want from like a successful policymaker or governor or executive. It's really strange, JJ. I mean, I said it to someone. I was like, if you were a CEO with these behaviors, you'd be like the shittiest CEO in the world. Because your company is totally going to shit behind you, and all you're doing is running around being like, "Look at me, look at my vision." Like I used to operate, a company, and like the important thing when you're operating a company was the like day to day, the satisfaction of your people, like whether or not you were actually providing whatever service you were providing at like the highest level, and most of those things had nothing to do with. It would be like, if an NBA player like just did press all the time and stopped working out or something totally ridiculous. And so you're right that like, unfortunately, the way our running for office, the mechanics, like it rewards certain personality traits. It also, frankly, and I said this on the trail before, like I think it's tougher on women. It's tougher on underrepresented minorities who often don't have like a financial base or like a bunch of people they can call and say, hey, will you donate money to my campaign? So we're ruling out a lot of awesome people from the get-go. And one way I think we could change that is if we just like either financed campaigns publicly, or my proposal was we gave everyone $100 democracy dollars. And then if you don't have a lot of money, like all of your buddies would still have $100, and it doesn't matter if they're rich buddies. Yeah. It could be like anyone to be like, hey, you get 1,000 people together. That'd be like enough to get started. But yeah, thank you for saying that about the way I came across on the trail. Like, I'm glad it was apparent that, I wasn't running for, some ego-driven reason.
Yeah, for sure.
We're spending more time at home than ever before. And the question is, how do you keep yourself learning, excited, interested, creative? Skillshare is a fantastic resource. It's an online learning community with thousands of classes for creative and curious people who want to learn new skills, hence Skillshare. I've actually been a fan of this company for years and years, in part because I know the founder, and he's a great guy, and he's a musician and artist who just wanted people to learn stuff. And so one class that I gotta say, like, appeals to me a lot is filmmaking for people at home right now. It's being taught by Penny Lane. And what they say is, like, if you have found footage of home videos, you can actually make a quality film out of it. And that's something that I feel like all of us can relate to, because I've got a lot of weird, crappy footage on my phone, typically of my kids, and it is not particularly shareable. So if there is some way I could make that stuff actually legit, Penny Lane and Skillshare. But it's not just that class. It's photography, music, illustration, freelancing, just trying to build your own business and entrepreneurship. So explore your creativity and get 2 free months of premium membership at Skillshare.com/Yang. That's 2 whole months of unlimited access to thousands of classes for free. Join today heading to Skillshare.com/Yang. 2 free months of unlimited access to thousands of classes at Skillshare.com/Yang.
I have a question for you, and you may have talked about this on your podcast before, so I apologize. But I'm just curious, what was the biggest thing you learned about politics in general during your campaign?
I was educated on the role of the media. And I talked to Tom Steyer a little bit earlier today, and we were laughing about lessons learned on the trail. Tom's another guy who ran for president, and we were both talking about like how the media would really put their thumb on the scale in ways that like you found very jarring in real time. And I was sort of naive. I thought the job of the media was to show up and report. And so it's like if I had a great event, then you would report that I had a great event, and you would just sort of catalog what was going on. But there was very much like this filtering and weighing that the media was doing, and they would do it in ways big and small. And I was surprised by it repeatedly throughout the campaign, where I was just like, like one example I use, I'm not sure I've spoken about this openly, but like I spoke at an event in Iowa. It was one of the first events I did. It was in maybe even 2018. And the headline speaker at this event was Michael Avenatti. And this was when he was talking about running for president. And so I gave, and it was like my big political speech debut, and I had like practiced and everything. And it was like, and then Michael Avenatti spoke. And as far as the journalists in the room were concerned, it's like Andrew Yang didn't exist. And it was like all Michael Avenatti. And I thought objectively, Michael gave a bad speech. I was like, well, that was shitty. He just like read every word. He went 5 minutes over. I thought the applause was like polite. And then the journalists in attendance were like, Michael Avenatti, like rocks Iowa. And I was like, what is going on? Like that doesn't seem to me to be like an objective depiction of reality. And so that was one of like the first big clues I got, was that like the press had certain narratives that they almost had preloaded. Yeah. And then when the story came, like the story was almost pre-written. And so like there was a period when I was like trying to weigh my own performance. I was like, oh, if I just like kicked more ass at that Iowa event, then they might have like written like a line or two or a paragraph about Andrew Yang, but it wasn't really.
Right. Objectively, you were great that day. Objectively.
Oh well, thank you, JJ. I thought so too. I mean, but yeah, it was like that.
This is one of the issues, with media, but I think it's difficult for the person, the personal side of journalism. It is difficult because we're human beings to separate your own bias and your own agenda and what you're seeing, because you're seeing it through your lens. That's difficult. When it becomes really problematic is when the corporate media has too much say in the lens that we're viewing. And I think you know what I mean by that. But when we're talking about institutional bias and institutional agenda, that's what's telling the story. That's where we're seeing this huge divisiveness, I think, across this country.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a growing mistrust of various cable news channels and corporate media as a result. And that mistrust is really destructive when you're talking about, for example, a pandemic, and everyone's looking around saying, well, what do I trust? And you have, let's say, certain news sources or authorities saying, wearing a mask is a really good idea. Then some people, somehow that got politicized in some circles. You're like, how the heck could you politicize that one? Like,
yeah.
It seems.
I literally talked about this on my podcast. I think it was last week, where it's like everything now. And look, we were told for weeks not to wear a mask. I'm sure we all want to do over on that. But everything now, every study coming out now, well, the way to mitigate this, the way to reduce this, is to just wear a mask. And somehow that not wearing a mask has become, at least on social media, you're owning the libs if you don't wear a mask.
Yeah, it's very dark.
I don't get that. I don't understand that at all. We're talking about your own, health, the greater public's health, maybe a relative's health. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about Democratic or Republican here.
Yeah, I just tweeted. The coronavirus doesn't care if you're tired of the coronavirus.
I saw that. It was good.
So it's just like, it doesn't give a shit about your politics. It just wants to, get in there and proliferate and reproduce itself. So one thing that's going to make you, I believe, the Yang Gang's favorite athlete is that you actually were pro-universal basic income before anyone had even heard of Andrew Yang. And I'm actually like fascinated by this because I'm really interested how you came to this conclusion independently before I even arrived on the scene.
Yeah. So I didn't come to the conclusion independently. I certainly had some nudging in the right direction. So I'd started reading articles about UBI. I think about 2017. And again, as humans, we develop differently. My sort of social and political and awakening, like I'm in the middle of it right now, and I'm trying to figure it out because you and I have talked about this before. I'm trying to figure out sort of the second half of life and what that means beyond just being a basketball player and beyond just truthfully being a dad. Like there's something else out there. So I started hearing about UBI in 17. I read, some of the results of some of the studies done. And then you were on a podcast, I think in the fall.
Sam Harris's
podcast. Yes. That's literally my favorite podcast. So you went on Sam Harris's podcast and you were obviously gearing up for this run. So that's when it really came into sort of my consciousness. And so I've been a supporter of UBI now for almost 2 years. You and I have talked about how I can get involved in some things that you're doing. It's something that I support. It's something that I inherently believe in for a number of reasons. I had a question for you, though, about UBI.
Sure.
So this is a question that I have. Has there ever been a study or one of these experiments that last beyond a set number of years? Or has it all been, we're going to do this for 5 years, we're going to do this for 10 years, whatever. There's a term limit, essentially.
Man, I wish that we were looking at 5 or 10 years as the trial lengths. I mean, most of the studies that have been done have been for shorter periods than that. Maybe 1 to 2 years would be customary. So you'd have to go further afield. There was a MinCom study in Canada that extended for multiple years, and it was long enough so that people could rely upon it. And there you saw incredibly positive effects around people, not just like being less stressed out or mentally healthier, but they actually made different career decisions based upon the fact that they could rely upon this money. They knew they had it coming in for a number of years. And so you literally saw people start small businesses and go back to school and do all these things that you hope people would do. But there need to be more trials that are longer in time frame, because I think, it's like you get something, you're like, okay, this is great, but can you rely upon it long enough where it actually starts making you like make different life decisions?
Right.
And that's something we're going to find out. So we're doing a trial, that it's going to be for 5 years. And I think that might be one of the longest trials going here in the United States. The other things that have been out there, unfortunately, though I will say in the developing world, some of these things are planning on extending for a long period of time, but they only got started 1 or 2 years ago in some of these settings. Like Give Directly, some of the work they're doing internationally, I believe is supposed to be evergreen, but it hasn't been around long enough to be able to see what it looks like 5 or 10
the
years
long
in.
term. Yeah, that sort of brings me to just a thought that I have about UBI in general is, is behavioral change has to occur or will occur if something is going to last longer than a certain period of time. I'll give you an example. So if I retire, when I retire, I have a little bridge.
At the ripe old age of 46, after the stroke eventually abandons you, after you set every
at some point
record.
soon. At some point soon. So whenever I retire, I have a bridge program. They call it the bridge program, where an annuity pays me a certain amount a month until I hit age 50, and at that point I can take out pension. So at age 50, I can take out my pension. Now at this point,
is this set up through the NBA, or is this something that
this is through the NBA and the NBPA? No, this is through the NBA, NBPA. We basically 1% of all BRI goes to this sort of program. So the owners get 49, we get 51. 1% of that 51 goes towards health benefits, retired player care, this bridge program. We get an annuity based on your years of service. It pays you a certain amount till age 50. At 50, you can take out your pension. Well, at 50, I know exactly how much money I'll get from my pension, and I know that it's going to last I'll get paid that out the rest of my life. There's no term limit on that. For most people, when they retire, they're getting a pension or they've got their 401k. Like these are numbers that are sort of set in stone. That affects your behavior. That affects how you budget. That affects the risks you take. When you're talking about a 1 or 2 year period, I don't know that that's enough time to directly affect behavioral change in terms of risk and happiness. To me, there's probably even more of a stress factor there. Like, what am I going to do with this extra money? I've only got 24 months to make this happen. So I would be very interested to see, if we could implement this on a longer term basis.
I agree with you. We need to make it so that people can actually make different decisions. And instead of thinking like, oh, I will say happily, like I've personally given $1,000 a month to several families. And I'm happy to say that it really does make them feel like they have a lot more freedom and liberty during that year. And it doesn't stress them out thinking like, oh, like what am I going to do out this end? They're actually like pretty pleased. Yeah. But I'm with you.
Well, I think for most people though, like, look, you're talking about, do I pay my bills? Do I buy groceries? Do I pay for my kid's school? Do I get out of student debt? Like there's so many financial decisions that the average person has to make. And it's why this money is so important that we get it in people's hands. It's a benefit to the individual and it's a benefit to society. There's no question in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. And most Americans now are waking up to the fact that we can do this and we should do this. I just hope that Congress follows the will of the people. I think the last poll I saw was something like 72% of Americans agree we should be getting cash relief during the pandemic. Yeah. And what's funny too is my campaign ended and then the energy around me and universal basic income just shot up because unfortunately we're in these circumstances. You
were ahead of your time. You were ahead of your time.
Yeah, 5 months ahead of my time or whatever it was. This episode is brought to you by The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you like podcasts, you should definitely check out The Jordan Harbinger Show. It's designed to make you understand the world better and think more critically. So you remember that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Catch Me If You Can? Remember that con man, Frank Abagnale? So that's the kind of person that Jordan has on to talk about how the heck he became one of the most prominent con men in the world, I guess, if you can become a well-known con man because you're supposed to be secret, and now advises the FBI, how a cinematographer discovered a lost city in the jungle and was like a real-life Indiana Jones. It's that kind of stuff. So if that sounds appealing to you to understand more about the world, go to jordanharbinger.com/subscribe and check it out. This is one of Apple's top 50 podcasts of 2018. Hey, maybe our podcast will be on that list this year. We'll see.
My favorite episode was this pseudoscience episode with this guy named Justin Ramsdell. So I don't know how many times you look and you see an article. It's like, this study said this. This study says if you do this, you'll be better at XYZ. And you never know what's real science, what's pseudoscience. So there's a whole episode on how to detect what's real and what's fake, which I found really helpful.
Oh, so one thing I have to say, I don't envy JJ, is that there's been this multi-month period where you've been in isolation, and there's this restart hanging off in the distance. So for most of us, if we've done any kind of exercise, we like pat ourselves on the back and we're like, oh, I didn't become a total freaking, slug or sedentary couch potato during this time. But for you guys, oh my gosh, you have to like maintain yourself in like world-class condition in perpetuity just because you don't know when the restart is coming. Like that seems to me to be the hardest thing in the world, particularly when you have like young kids and the rest of you have to break away. Like what the heck did you do to stay in shape? Because that seems crazy. I mean, you must be like one of the most self-disciplined, guys in the world. But like, yeah, what the heck was your regimen?
Yeah, no, I'm a very much a routine-based person. And so I made the decision when everything got shut down. I left New Orleans. I came up to New York. The first probably 10 to 14 days, I just kind of like sort of took inventory of everything. I was trying to get as much information as possible about timelines, about what was going on with the coronavirus, about what was going on with local and federal governments. So a lot of that first 10 to 14 days, I was not focused on basketball at all. And I realized that for me to stay sane during this period of time, that I had to get back in the gym. So after that sort of 14-day quarantine, I found access to a gym. I worked out every day there for about 2 months. And then I came back to Brooklyn May 10th, and I've had access to a gym here. So I've with the exception of maybe the first 2 weeks and then 4 or 5 other days, I've been in the gym every day. I may be one of the first, I've lost like 14 pounds, to be honest with you. I weighed myself today. I was 192. I left New Orleans. I was like 206. So I've lost like 14 pounds. Now, some of that, of course, was post-workout water weight, but I feel like I'm in great shape right now. I've done a ton of conditioning. I need to get back in New Orleans and Orlando where I have access to a better weight room than what I have access to right now. But all in all, I feel like I'm in good shape and I'll be prepared to go. I know there's been a couple guys that have dropped out for varying reasons, and I think everybody has their motivations to play or not to play. And to me, they're all very valid because this is such a unique situation.
Yeah, again, I think people are overlooking the human aspect of a lot of this, because what I just said, like staying in shape throughout the quarantine, hard, committing yourself mentally to go back to play in a part of the country that right now is seeing a spike in COVID cases for 2 months away from your family. I mean, people don't realize what a sacrifice that can be depending upon what your situation is at home. So it's a lot, to me. I think, like you just said, it would be very human and valid for people to take different positions on the restart, and you couldn't blame them. Like, this is not a situation where you'd be like, oh, what's with these guys? Like, like, right. I want my sports, entertain me. Like, right. I think there's like a very legitimate attack on both sides. There's also the feeling that some have that Black Lives Matter protests are front and center, and that you don't necessarily want anything to distract from that. Though the flip side of that, obviously, is that you can actually have a platform to talk about social issues. I'm of the vantage points, like I could see people making whatever decisions right for them on either side, and being all for it. The tough thing is that we all know there's just a ton of money at stake for both the players and the league. Like, if you don't finish the season, I think that's like literally, it's like almost like $1 billion hit across players and owners and teams. And that's like a very, very powerful set of incentives to try and figure out a way to finish the season. And, a lot of players like you might have very strong personal reasons why you very much want to make sure you get the season done and get the playoffs in.
Yeah, in terms of me getting in the playoffs, I would say that's very far down my list. It's insignificant in the grand scheme of things. I do believe the financial reasons for returning for either a player or the league itself go beyond just the money we stand to lose this year, because I do believe, our CBA is sort of in flux right now. And so if we decide not to play, or if COVID, let's say, wipes out Orlando and all of a sudden we're in a lockdown and we can't play, there's going to be financial repercussions into next year, into the following year, until things are sort of back to normal in terms of fans going to games. We're looking at a hit regardless. Look, my responsibility, just say this, my responsibility always is going to be for my family. And if I feel like they are going to be safe and taken care of, then I'm okay leaving them. Do I want to leave them for 2 months? No, of course not. But my other responsibility is to the league and to the game. It's been amazing to me. And to your point, I totally understand both perspectives of the motivation for not playing versus playing with respect to Black Lives Matter. I do believe there is a huge opportunity for us to have a platform, but that platform goes beyond just wearing a T-shirt or kneeling during the anthem. I believe it'll be the first time we've had that many players in one place. The teams will be there. The league will be there. We can have open and direct conversations about coming up with initiatives and actions that will directly benefit Black people and Black communities. I believe that. I believe that is the opportunity in us playing and in us going to Orlando, beyond just having a platform and a microphone and a camera. Like, I think we can get some things done. I think the league will negotiate that on good faith. I think our union is motivated to do that. I know our players are motivated to really put forth meaningful change beyond just wearing a T-shirt and kneeling during the national anthem. Like, we need to move beyond that.
There could be something very magical and powerful about having that many players in the same place, along with leadership and teams. Like, you can imagine something very, very significant coming out of that kind of gathering, not just culturally, but organizationally, resource wise.
The other flip side of that is deciding not to play and saying it's going to be a distraction from the Black Lives Matter movement. Totally get that too, and agree with that too. It's not wrong. I don't think either one of those perspectives is wrong. I think they're both right. You've seen WNBA players, I think 3 or 4 of them already. Natasha Cloud, Renee Montgomery, Maya Moore a couple years ago. You've seen a number of players come out and say, I'm going to skip this season and focus on the social justice movement that's happening for Black Lives Matter right now. And I applaud that. I really do. I think it takes an incredible amount of courage to do that. I don't know that it's right for an entire league. I don't know if it's wrong for an entire league to sit out. I don't know the answer to that. So it's a very complicated situation for sure.
Well, hats off to you for approaching it in a really thoughtful way. And as another family man, it's true. When you know your family's going to be all right, then you're capable of taking a lot of things on. You know what I mean? Like when my family was like I could see that they were happy and healthy, and I was on the trail, and I'd be like, it's all good. They're fine, and I could go do my thing. And certainly, like you, I feel very fortunate in that side where whenever anyone thanked me for running for office, I would say, thank my wife, because she's the one who's doing more work and taking on the chin than relative to me. So I can relate very much to that sense of security that, enables you to go out and play or fight or campaign. So, I think you're approaching it in a great way. And I have a feeling that many of the other players are approaching it similarly.
I told my wife this on, I think it was either her birthday or Mother's Day. I put up an Instagram post, and one of the things I said to her, both in her card that day and on the Instagram post, was just how appreciative I am that she allows me to pursue my obsessions. Like, I don't overlook that fact. I don't overlook the fact that I can be obsessive about things and I pursue them in my own way. And she has always given me the space to do that and the support to do that. And again, it goes back to your point about being out on the campaign trail. There's a part of you, there's a piece of your heart that is just, it's not there. It's missing when you're not with the people you love the most. But if you know that they're okay and you know that they're supporting you, then you can sort of go forth with a great amount of confidence.
Yeah, I could never do the things I did if not for Evelyn. So, you say you love you to your spouse all the time. I actually alternate between saying I love you and I appreciate you because there's just a lot of gratitude.
The acknowledgement, it's what you need.
Yeah. I used to joke, JJ, I had two priorities, eliminate poverty and stay married. And I was like, as long as I get those two, I've gotten the second one done. Hopefully we can get the first one done if Congress will listen to the vast majority of Americans who want to make it better. Hey, JJ, such a pleasure talking to you. Congratulations on really like an incredible career. What I know is going to be an incredible second career. I mean, I said this to you before, but you're going to succeed at anything you put your mind to, man. Because like you're going to end up being one of those role models of NBA players that do something really, really awesome as a second act of your career. And if there's anything I can do ever to be a resource to help you in that regard, please let me know.
Thank you, Andrew. And I know I told you this the other day when you said that to me, but it's hearing those words out of your mouth means a lot to me. I also want to just say I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to come on your podcast, and as you've launched this thing, and huge honor to be on this pod and to be able to speak on your platform. So thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, man. Right back at you.
Yeah.
You're
You're the man. You're actually, if I put this up on mine, you're speaking on my platform too.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say right back at you. It's my privilege to show up on the JJ Redick podcast.
There you go.
On the Ringer Network, et cetera, et cetera.